After having seen who this Mr. Pivaruna was, let us see in a second part, some aspects of his doctrine. It's a pitiful example of the doctrinal deficiencies of Mr. Pivarunas. After having taken a quick glance at the environment that participated in the formation of Pivarunas, let us see the fruits of it through a very succinct analysis that does not deserve better. Of a document dating from 1996, when we are given to understand that it would date from February 15, 2021. Let us note first of all that our Pivarunas considers his intervention as a pastoral letter. This alone says a lot about the Catholic education of our fellow. This being the case, the aim of this document is to justify episcopal consecrations without an apostolic mandate, including and especially, of course, his own. To this end, after a short introduction recalling the fruits of the bogus council known as Vatican II, in particular from the point of view of the ecclesial hierarchy, he gives us his thesis. The episcopal consecration without pontifical mandate is justified by the state of necessity in which Christian society finds itself. In this perspective, it is therefore imperative to preserve the Catholic faith, the holy priesthood, and the holy sacrifice of the Mass in order, I'm quoting Pivarunas, in order to ensure the promise of Christ that there are shepherds and doctors in his church until the consummation of the world. Okay, end of quotation. So we will notice here that the thought conveyed strangely leaves appearing an idea in the background. That is, in order not to make our Lord Jesus Christ lie, we need in capital letters, shepherds and teachers. Otherwise, what meaning to give to this part of the sentence, in order to ensure the promise of Christ? The question that naturally arises then is, how far do we have to go to ensure this promise? The answer has already been given since the essential question, namely, can one resort to episcopal consecrations from heretical and schismatic lines, is not even touched upon here, and that the first part of this video gives us an affirmative answer in actions to this one. So the end justifying for them the means, questions of this order seem totally incongruous to this kind of character. And here is indeed the basis of Pivarunas' thought. I'm quoting his thought, okay? Faced with the great apostasy foretold by St. Paul in his second letter to the Thessalonians, what should they have done? Should they do nothing? Current opponents of the consecration of bishops answer in the affirmative. Thus, upon the death of those traditional Catholic bishops who remained faithful to the true faith, no bishops would have remained to succeed them. And without bishops, there would ultimately be no priest, no Mass, and no sacraments. To sum up, faced with the fear of seeing our Lord caught in the act of lying, this is terrible, it is necessary to perpetuate the Catholic faith, the holy priesthood, and the holy sacrifice of the Mass by all means, including illegal ones. That's terrible, even invalid. We will appreciate here the trust in God of this young pastor. After having endowed us with his theological point of view, in speech marks, theological point of view, he will undertake two explanations to justify it, one historical and the other canonical. Let us analyze the correctness of these two considerations. The first one is the historical point of view. The little reminder of history that is offered to us by Pivarunas comes, according to his own words, from a doctor in ecclesiastical history. We close speech marks. Excuse a little. He gives us the name, Dr. Stefano Filiberto, and the book, or rather the magazine from which this reminder is taken, Il Nuovo Cattolico Osservatore. At this point, we are immersed in what is referred to as one of the longest periods of pontifical office or vacancy in the history of the Catholic Church. The dates from November the 29th, the year 1268, to September the 1st, the year 1271. Sorry. So, the scene being said, we are then hit with the following. During this long period of vacancy for the Apostolic See, vacancy of office also occurred in many dioceses around the world, so that priests and faithful cannot be left without shepherds. Bishops were elected and consecrated to fill vacant seats. Thus were accomplished at least 21 elections and consecration in different countries. The most important aspect of this historical precedent is that all of these consecrations of bishops were ratified by Pope Gregory X, who therefore confirmed the legality of such consecrations. Then follow some examples of bishops thus consecrated at the time of the vacancy of the Apostolic See, and to admire the accuracy of the example, we'll take the first bishop cited, Raoul de Thiéville, Bishop of Avranches, from November 1269 to December 1292. See Hubel or Gans. We find in the history of the Diocese of Coutances and Avranches, for the earliest time by Father Lecanu, in volume 1, page 313, that Raoul de Thiéville was elected by the canons of the Church of Avranches. Bishop Richard the English died in 1269, and the canons elected as his replacement Raoul de Thiéville, Dean of the Chapter of the family of the Lords of Vannes. This prelate, who was to govern the Church of Avranches until 1292, is remarkable among all for a great piety, a tender and compassionate charity, a great knowledge, and always equal kindness and a great humility. He was then consecrated by the Archbishop of Rouen, a metropolitan whose bishopric of Avranches was suffragan. See the religious annals of Avranches by Abbé de Roche, in Mémoire de la Société des Antiquaires de Normandie, volume 14, page 460. Richard Lane was buried in his cathedral in the year 1269. Raoul de Thiéville, or rather Thiéville, Dean of the Chapter, was consecrated Bishop of Avranches by the Archbishop of Rouen. By this simple observation we can see, 1. The veracity of what Don Guéranger tells us in his work on the election of and the appointment of bishops on page 19. I'm going to quote Don Guéranger. Changes which have occurred in the long run in the march of the Western Church lead to an important modification in the 13th century. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 under Innocent III invested the chapters with the power of the election. This important measure, which deprived the provincial council of its right already so unrecognized and so prodigiously weakened, contained nevertheless the election in the sanctuary. The father of canon law, Gregory IX, organized the discipline of chapter elections in his decrees, and this order of things would have been maintained for a long time if human passions in these centuries, whose harshness the church has softened, without however succeeding in destroying her completely, had not rushed upon this instrument of discord and scandal. For more details, we can refer with advantage to the work of Achille Lucher, entitled Manual of French Institutions, Period of Direct Capetians, pages 32 and the following. We see by this that a problem arises as to the example proposed. So it is one of two things. Either Dr. Filiberto obtained his degrees in a bonus package, which is very famous or known in France, okay, bonus package, or Pivarunas altered Stefano Filiberto's thinking in the diverting for its own benefit. Be that as it may, the example taken here cannot apply to our time for the simple reason that it speaks to us of cases concerning the ancient discipline of the Church, where bishops were elected and then confirmed by their metropolitan, while today we are under the new discipline which sees the Pope having taken back what he had for a very long time conceded, as Pope Pius VI specifies to us in his letter Caritas. We're going to quote Pius VI Caritas letter. If it is true that the elected bishop can, according to the old discipline, have a legitimate title only by receiving the institution of the metropolitan, who himself has this privilege only as an emanation of the rights of the Apostolic Holy See, this power to confer jurisdiction according to the new discipline, in use for several centuries, confirmed by the Councils General and by concordats, does not even belong to the metropolitan. He has returned to the source from which he started, and resides only in the Apostolic See. Today is the Roman Pontiff, who by virtue of his dignity can give bishop to churches. These are the terms of the Council of Trent, session 24, chapter 1, from reference. Thus, in the Catholic Church, there can no longer be any legitimate consecration other than that conferred by a mandate apostolic. And we can see briefs and instructions of our Holy Father, Pope Pius VI, the first volume, pages 321 and the rest following. For the record, in the Council of Trent, in session 24, the Decree of Reformation, chapter 1, the first chapter, and when in the following such an investigation information of some appointed prelate will have been thus made and completed, will be drawn up in a public document with all the attestation and the profession of faith of the person will have to be promoted, to send everything as soon as possible to the Most Holy Father, so that as sovereign pontiff, having taken full knowledge of all business and people, he may provide the churches with more food and utility for the flock of our Lord, if by the examination and investigation which will have been made of them, they have been found capable. This being the case, perhaps it will be interesting in our turn to give some examples in connection with the new discipline, the one invoked by Pius VI and that Pius XII still recalled, like Pivarunas underlies in the following. A. The case of Portugal. During the Revolution of 1640, bringing the House of Braganza to the throne, let us remember the sad emptiness of the churches in Portugal at the time of the Revolution, 1st December 1640, which brought the House of Braganza to the throne. This is in the oral process of the clergy, Tom 3, page 686. In order not to prejudice the rights of the King of Spain and to avoid his reprisals, Innocent X believed himself obliged to refuse the bulls to the bishops appointed by John IV. However, the episcopate was dying out. The immense Portuguese colonies no longer saw on their numerous seats but two old men ready to descend into the tomb. Portugal itself had only one bishop. In vain, Rome wanted to try to provide for such an extreme necessity, without prejudge in no way the rights of contenders. She was told that in doing so, she was putting herself in hostility against the Catholic kingdom. The Church had to wait in silence for the conclusion of an early treaty before he was allowed to reconnect the broken chain of his dying hierarchy. 28 years until February the 12th, 1668, date of the Treaty of Lisbon, had passed on the tombs of the pontiffs, without giving them the successors whom the people call with loud cries. And let us not here accuse Rome of weakness and complicity. Rome does not create the circumstances. Its mission is only to make them turn to the salvation of the Church and to avoid, by choosing the lesser of two inevitable evils, the pitfalls that could compromise the bark of St. Peter. That is from Don Geringer on the election and appointments of bishops, pages 223-224. And B is the case of the Archdiocese of Goa in India. We ask if, in case of necessity, it is allowed to a bishop or to another superior prelate to take the administration of his church, located in remote regions, before having received his apostolic letters of provision or of confirmation. This doubt arose on the occasion of the Archbishop of Goa, Primate of India, because the letters of the Pope which contained his provision having perished, this Archbishop, in spite of extreme necessity of his charge, widowed for 5 years, could not consent to take the administration because of the extravagant Boniface VIII injunctive of elect and the Constitution of Julius III, promulgated on March 27, 1553, and which begins with these words, Sanctissimus intisto pater, which forbid under severe penalties bishops and prelates to interfere in the government of the churches entrusted to them, or to accept the administration of ecclesiastical goods before having received their letters of promotion, confirmation and consecration. The Archbishop did not doubt that the Pope had proclaimed him in the consistory, and yet he does not believe he can administer before his bulls have reached him. And the Sacred Congregation, interpreter of the Council of Trent, approves of his conduct and sees no other means of preventing the inconveniences of this kind than to ship multiple copies of the bubbles through different routes. Of the bulls, multiple copies of the bulls through different routes. Nothing proves the wisdom of this decision better than the story of Don Bernardin de Cárdenas, appointed Bishop of the Assumption on May the 18th, 1640. He was recommended in Rome on August the 18th of the same year, and consecrated by the Bishop of Tucumán in October 1641, without having received his bulls. He then went to the Assumption, but several members of his chapter refused to recognize him, and the Congregation of the Holy Council of Trent, having been consulted, declared that this consecration made without the apostolic letters having been presented was not legitimate, both for this reason and because the consecrating bishop had been assisted by only 2 canons without the permission of the Pope. That it was, however, valid as to the impression of the character, but that it had been null and void as regards the lawful exercise of episcopal functions, from where it follows, as Father Charles Lebois, that Bernardin de Cárdenas never had jurisdiction in his diocese, since he was only absolved after leaving it, censorship with which he was bound, not only because of the irregularity of his coronation, but also for having taken possession of his diocese and used all the powers attached to his character and which he did not have. And please see Lamennais from the Tradition of the Church on the Institution of Bishops, Volume 3, pages 35 and the following. So, there is no need to be a great scholar to realize that Pivarunas here wants to clearly mislead us by giving us irrelevant historical examples. He doesn't even hide it. He who specifies, at this point, those who oppose the consecration of the traditional Catholic bishops of our time could argue that the historical precedent cited happened 700 years ago. Let us remember here the words of Pius XI. We know, alas, that to legitimize their usurpations, those who refuse to obey follow the practice followed in the other centuries. But there is no one who does not see what would become ecclesiastical discipline if, in such and such a matter, anyone were permitted to revert to provisions which are no longer in force because the supreme authority of the Church decided otherwise long ago. Moreover, the fact of appealing to a different discipline, far from excusing their actions, proves their intention to deliberately evade the discipline currently in force, the only one they must follow. Not content with trying to deceive us with off-topic examples, he confirms his desire to deceive us by then using canon law. Number 2, the canonical point of view. Starting from the decree of the Holy Office of April 9, 1951, establishing a penalty for the consecration of a bishop without canonical provision. That is in the Acta Apostolica Sedis, volume, it's in Roman 43, I think, 1951, page 217. Pivarunas will give us a legal consultation tending to make us admit that the law obliging under the most serious penalties to have an apostolic mandate for an episcopal consecration has lapsed by intrinsic cessation, Canon 21. And his thesis still rests under the same chorus. Thus, in our time, strict observance of the decree of Pope Pius XII on the prohibition of the consecration of bishops without a pontifical mandate will become harmful to the salvation of souls. Without bishops, there would ultimately be no priest or masses or sacraments. With his invariable response, was this the intention of the legislator, Pope Pius XII? Would he have wanted his decree to be strictly interpreted as leading to the end of the apostolic succession? Of course not. In an attempt to base his demonstration on Catholic foundations, Pivarunas invokes St. Thomas Aquinas in his first questions 90, Article 4. Note at this stage that the translator confuses law and justice with abutting an eyelid. And please note that in French we say la loi, le droit et la loi, but in English the translation is always law. So we have translated as law and justice, okay? But we refer to la loi et le droit. Now, the law is defined as an ordinance of reason made for the common good, promulgated by the one who has the power in a society of ordinance, in a society in ordinance. That is C. Drieu, Summa Theologica by St. Thomas d'Aquin, third tome, page 383. Pivarunas then makes us admit the need for the decree of Pius XII, when it appeared in 1951, with regard to the common good, to immediately deny the same need today by adding, in our time, strict observance of the decree of Pope Pius XII on the prohibition of the consecration of bishops without a pontifical mandate will become harmful to the salvation of souls. And then comes the magic wand that our budding canonist introduces in order to allow him to quietly free himself from all constraints. And this is the notion of epikeia. And there it's a deluge of quotes on the definition of epikeia, from Buscaren, from Prumer, the Catholic Encyclopedia, from Heribert John, thus hoping to convince his world. But as in any fireworks display, the final stand remains the invocation to the salvation of souls, Salus Animarum Lex Suprema, which makes it possible to justify a position which is nothing other than heretical. We can clearly see at this point that the sweet words of Mr. Pivarunas, swearing to us at the beginning of his speech that these measures were taken without any intention of denying the primacy of jurisdiction of the Roman Pontiff, the supreme authority of the Pope. These bishops and the priests they ordained wholeheartedly profess the Catholic faith, which includes the doctrine concerning the primacy of jurisdiction and the infallibility of the Roman Pontiff, were filled with subtle hypocrisy. The only aim of the document analyzed is to flout the primacy of jurisdiction of the Apostolic See. This is moreover what the immediate continuation of the text whispers to us. In the circumstances then prevailing, the office of the Pope, which lasts until the end of time, was vacant. Thus, there was an impossibility of obtaining a pontifical mandate to authorize episcopal consecrations. We can therefore only conclude with the Lamennais brothers that in fact we no longer hold to the center of unity except by a derisory profession of respect, the most important right of the Apostolic See, that of giving the mission to the first pastors, being only a human institution, all the others, less essential, do not have a different origin. We can therefore remove, like the first, so that it is not its power, but only its title, which is of divine institution. That is, you can see in Lamennais Traditions of the Church on the Institution of Bishop, Volume 3, pages 294 and 295. We are now going to see what Catholic doctrine tells us on the subject and see that the teaching of this false pastor is indeed intended to deceive us, since he is diametrically opposed to it. And we're going to quote the great Don Grea. According to Don Grea, the episcopate has no other source than Jesus Christ and the vicar of Jesus Christ, in the indivisible unity of the same principate. In fact, as our hierarchy imitates the divine society of God and His Son, Christ Jesus, it cannot any more than this august type admit in itself any other order of persons than that of the procession, that is, of the mission given and received. If therefore the episcopate is dependent on St. Peter, this dependence is sufficient to show that he proceeds from St. Peter and that the bishops receive their mission from him. This doctrine will appear even clearer if we reflect on the fact that dependence in the episcopate is only the mission itself, insofar as it is received continuously and habitually by the bishops. The mission, as we have already said, is not an act once performed and which no longer exists except in its effects, but it constitutes a permanent relationship outside of which the powers conferred by it no longer exist. It is a source that cannot stop flowing without the earth drying out, a sun that cannot withdraw its rays without darkness invading space. It is moreover the application of a general law of the words of God, for creatures only persist in the being part they have for creatures only persist in the being that they have received from Him through the conservative act which is creation itself continued. Or rather, it is here an imitation of the majestic laws of life which is in God Himself. In Him, the birth of the Son is eternal and constitutes Him in an original dependence which has neither beginning nor end, and which can neither be suspended nor destroyed. Likewise, and by a faithful resemblance of this type imprinted in the hierarchy, the powers of the pastors received by them at the beginning in the legitimate mission cannot subsist outside this mission, continually and habitually operating in them. Their origin thus makes all their dependence well, and their powers are thereby endlessly so attached to the one who conferred them, that he alone can always retain them, suspend them, moderate their action or destroy them, as being the principle always operating in them, and thus dependence on the original relation are very certainly and fundamentally one and the same thing. Thus, depending on St. Peter, it is quite clearly for the episcopate to derive from him the origin of the mission, and by the very nature of the episcopate, which is this dependence, bishops must be sent and instituted by him and by him alone. It is therefore not by an arbitrary arrangement, but by the very necessity of the divine order of the Church, that St. Peter alone can make a bishop, and that there is no legitimate or possible episcopate outside of this single origin. We can notice in passing that if the power to institute bishops belongs to St. Peter, it is to him that also belongs necessarily the power to judge them and to lay them down. These two powers answer each other. It is obviously up to the one who gives the vision that it is up to withdraw or rather to retain this gift. To take away is here properly to retain or to cease to give. And as the mission constitutes a permanent communication of power and life, which goes from the leader to the members, it suffices for the leader to stop spreading this gift of life on the members, so that they are stricken with helplessness and death. And fundamentally, it is so much for the vicar of Jesus Christ, source of the episcopate, to depose a bishop, that in this he only withdraws from one of his brothers to leave him inert and lifeless in the hierarchy. These notions are so evident by relation they have with the foundations of the hierarchical order that they cannot be denied or obscured without destroying these foundations, or by shaking them to make uncertain the whole divine economy of the Church. Catholic writers have, in our opinion, too easily granted that the discipline of the first centuries of the Church in the institutions of bishops was not as favorable to the power of the Supreme Pontiff as that of modern times, as if this serious matter belonged entirely to human and properly ecclesiastical legislation. But the immutable principles of hierarchy are here engaged, and it is necessary to show that they have always been clearly taught and maintained by a public and universal tradition, and that they have formed the basis of the discipline of all ages, equally unanimous in proclaiming them. The Pope alone institutes bishops. This right belongs to him sovereignly, exclusively and necessarily, by the very constitution of the Church and the nature of the hierarchy, that is from Don Grea on the Church and its Divine Constitution, 1964, pages 237 to 241. We therefore see, as the Lamennais brothers have already told us, that the institution of bishops does not entirely belong to human or properly ecclesiastical legislation, since it is by even necessity of the divine order of the Church that only St. Peter can make a bishop. So how can we invoke epikeia in these circumstances? The Reverend Father A. Delchard, Society of Jesus, confirms this doctrine to us in his commentary in the Nouvelle Revue Théologique, 1951, page 751 of the decree of April the 9th, 1951, establishing a penalty for the consecration of a bishop without canonical provision. Acta Apostolicae Series 33, 1951, page 217. This offense was already punished by the Code by virtue of the provision of Canon 2370. The bishop who gives the episcopal consecration, the bishop or failing them the assistant priest, and the one who, contrary to the prescriptions of Canon 953, receives episcopal consecration without an apostolic mandate are automatically suspended as long as the apostolic see has not dispensed them. We know that in the Latin Church, the Pope reserves all consecration of bishop for himself, so that it is never permitted to act without first having an apostolic mandate communicated either orally or by apostolic letters. The rule also applies in the event that Rome confirms an election. In the event of an offense, a severe vindictive sentence was provided for. It is now aggravated. The offense of episcopal consecration made without appointment of the consecrated person by the Holy See, or without express confirmation of his election by the same Holy See, is punishable by excommunication, censorship, incurred ipso facto, which is late sententia penalty. Absolution is very specially reserved for the Holy See, and the following persons are struck: the consecrating prelate and the consecrated individual. Due to the Constitution of Pius XII of November 30, 1944, which states that assistant bishops are true co-consecrators, it seems difficult to admit that the latter do not also fall under this same penalty. The decree specifies, with regard to the responsibility of the authors, that the offense is presumed seriously consummated, even if it would be under serious duress, by application of 3 of Canon 2229. Such an act is, in fact, not a violation of a purely ecclesiastical law, but even outside of a schismatic attitude, carries with itself contempt for ecclesiastical authority, and can only cause serious harm, public prejudice to the souls of the faithful. This new law was applicable from April the 21st, 1951, by reason of the clause contained in the decree, the nature of the offense explaining this particular measure. So, in view of this clarification, it only remains to know that the doctrine taught by Mr. Pivarunas is not that of the Catholic Church. So, taking Catholic authors explain the cessation of the ecclesiastical law ab intrinsico to strengthen a Catholic position will not necessarily make it Catholic. No. And it remains to conclude by paraphrasing Father Barbara in his magazine Fortes in Fide, Strong in the Faith, number 26. And Father Barbara, he says, this individual believed he could take a schismatic path to be a Catholic priest. Unfortunately, he was wrong. The wide and easy path he took did not lead him to the hopeful goal, for now he is indeed a schismatic priest. But you see, there is a whole range in the distance from those who leave the church. Some shy away from it more than others. Some go so far as to atheism. It remains true, however, that even those closest to us are still outside the church. And as long as they have not returned to the home that they should not have left, their salvation is in jeopardy. Let's listen to what St. Augustine wrote to the schismatics of his time, who also reassured themselves with arguments similar to those advanced by the followers of the so-called Tridentine Latin Rite Church, pompously renamed Congregatio Mariae Reginae Immaculatae. The great doctor of Hippo said to them, outside of the church you can have everything, the creed, the pater, the sacraments, you can even say Amen, but there is one thing you cannot have, and that is salvation, because those who were not in Noah's ark perished. It's a majestic quote by St. Augustine, taken from his sermon in Algiers, in Tome 29, page 422, and see also Liber de Fide ad Petrum Diaconum, Tome 22, page 407. And now comes the conclusion of everything, which is very important for you to understand. So the first fundamental thing they have to give up is resorting to heretics and schismatics, and any compromise with them, especially in sacred matters. They have to accept the respect for the divine will through the doctrine and the laws of the church. They have to abandon all illicit practice of ministries which they have knowingly usurped, to repair as much as possible the scandals in which they participated directly or indirectly. As long as they themselves remain in schismatic organizations, upholding doctrines or practices opposed to the doctrine and law of the church, they remain in schism and of themselves in a state of perdition. In addition, let us recall that the question of consecrations without a pontifical mandate is only put forward by these sectarians to distract minds from their fundamental deviation, which is their recourse to schismatics, heretics, and sectarians in sacred matters. They claim to be able to receive a legitimate apostolic succession or priestly ordination by those usurping them outside the Holy Church. Okay, so they are very, very cunning, very, very wise. So you have to be careful. And the general conclusion is that there is a constant in all these recent deviations, or relatively so, and that is a renewed occasion of fall, aiming to find a human solution to the apocalyptic crisis in which we are always more deeply embedded. That is based in particular by systematically placing the sacraments before the confession of the faith. All these sects have one thing in common. They put the sacraments first. They don't care so much about the faith, and that is terrible. That's a terrible mistake. So instead of acknowledging their helplessness, turn to God and implore His intervention and His help. They think they must imperatively find a human solution, even if it means imagining being able to find it in heretics or schismatics to supposedly save the church, in speech marks, by going to seek a false and deceptive help outside of her. So notice this is an incongruency, a gross contradiction. And this is reminiscent of the case of Lot's daughters, which is in the book of Genesis 19 from 31 to 38. Lot's daughters, they resorted to incest by getting their father with the aim of saving the human race. Lot's daughters, they thought they were going to save the human race, because they believed, indeed, that the fire that fell from heaven on the Pentapolis, namely the 5 cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Adama, Ebroim, and Segor, and the region surrounding them, had fallen on the whole of the earth. Okay, they thought that this fire had fallen on the whole of the earth as well. And imagining themselves the only survivors, they wanted to have offspring, even if it meant having to start over with their sons what they had made with their father. In fact, they were only the origins of the Moabites and Ammonites, who played the chosen people of Israel throughout their history. However, the example that faith and its necessary public confession invite us and make it a duty to follow is that of Prince Saint Hermenegild. And you can see that in Acta Sanctorum, the second tome, April, page 135 and the following. Saint Hermenegild was imprisoned by his father, the Arian king of the Visigoths, and who threatened to have him executed if he did not receive communion on Easter Day from an Arian bishop. And he rejected him as he had to, wrote Pope St. Gregory I the Great. And you can find it in his Dialogue, Book 3, Chapter 31. And he was executed. His glorious sacrifice and martyrdom obtained the conversion of his young brother Recoret, who, becoming king after the death of his father, brought all the Arian people of the Visigoths to the conversion and to the salutary adhesion to the Holy Catholic Church, out of which there is no salvation.
Thank you very much, Xavier, and God bless you, and God bless Ecclesia.
Exactly.